Good afternoon and welcome back. I was just going to say it's really good to see so many people come back on the second half. In my experience at City of London conferences, in fact in New York as well where I used to live, it's amazing though people pay for a ticket and come along, how many people don't come back or don't show up at all. As Woody Allen said, 90% of success is just showing up. I once won a car in a competition. When I asked the organisers why I'd won, they said, "You're the only person who entered." Seriously, I mean, this is all it takes, right? It's very little. Most people don't pay the basics. Thomas Edison said, most people miss opportunity because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. Yes, okay. Was there something I was told to talk about right now, Herbie? Am I missing something out?
The drinks in the bar.
The drinks in yes, I have to talk about that again. The drinks at the end of the afternoon, 5:30, with Les Ferdinand will be giving out a bottle of Herbie's best champagne, which is really, knowing Herbie and champagne, it will be the most expert vintage you can find. The first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Ruth Wandhöfer. I think I pronounced that possible. And so I'm going to welcome her to the stage now, and she's asked, please don't ask any questions at the end because she's got to go and get the children from school in Dunton Green in Sevenoaks, very close to where I live, so I know what she means. She's got to leave on time, otherwise she'll be in trouble with the kids. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and thank you for inviting me. So, ladies and gentlemen, we all remember that before the arrival of the internet, the world was a more local and physical place. Although we did have wires across the bottom of the Atlantic, sending pricing messages. And once the internet arrived, the world quite quickly became global and digital. As people started trading increasingly across borders, we realized the limits and restrictions of our value transfer systems, which operate within national borders and time zones where everything still flows across many local ledgers, a slow and inefficient process in a globalized world. Then in 2009, Bitcoin, and we earlier heard a lot about Bitcoin data from CryptoCompare, and its underlying distributed ledger technology arrived, and with it, the realization that there can be alternatives to our domestic centralized systems. Blockchain and distributed ledger is both local and global, and solves the inefficiency dilemma via decentralization and distribution. In the context of decentralization, it became quite clear quite quickly that if regulated industries and systems were to apply this type of technology, governance at large would still need to be centralized. In fact, I would argue that centralized governance would also be a better option for digital currencies, as the market needs certainty on code maintenance and upgrades. And for those who are more familiar with cryptocurrencies, obviously the hard forks we've seen in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other systems have been a bit of a problem and a bit of a shift in the market. Now, to financial market infrastructures. The purpose of financial market infrastructures is, of course, to maintain stability and orderly markets, manage risks, and support growth for businesses. And in order to fulfill this purpose in the digital age, the industry will have to stay in touch with technology innovation. In my view, we will need to think outside the box, put old structures and concepts and beliefs to the side, and instead work with the expanding set of digital tools to fix existing inefficiencies and to create new solutions that will fit the needs of the digital ecosystem that is evolving in front of our eyes. We are now at a crossroads where foundational technology innovation combined with the potential of cloud computing, big data, 5G, and so on will allow the market to take a big leap forward on its road to transformation. And obviously, innovation and transformation is the topic of today's conference. So in my brief message to you today, I would like to focus on two areas of technological advancements and how these relate to capital markets and its value chain. Distributed ledger technology, smart contracts, and the role of data simulation. Even though the last 20 years have seen significant change in the market infrastructure landscape, with the move from paper to electronic trading, we are still left with three major inefficiencies. The need to reconcile books and records between participants, the need for centralized providers to manage risk and facilitate communication, and the 2 to 3 day delay between trading and settlement. Despite the fact that current processes continue to develop with a view to increasing automation. The underlying infrastructure remains chunky, costly, and requires significant manual reconciliation, trade confirmations across auditors, regulators, and other parties and stakeholders due to the lack of connected legacy systems and manual back-office processes. Predictions by various research entities during the last 5 years indicate that the right digital infrastructure could lead to billions of dollars of savings globally. According to recent research from R3, an industry consortium, market participants are expecting to be ready for the new digital infrastructure in the next 1 to 5 years. But let us look more closely at what this could entail. So what are distributed ledgers and smart contracts? Now, hands up who's really familiar with these two terms and is using them day to day. Okay, so not everyone. Yeah, you at the back, hand down. We've been hearing the term blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and smart contracts for several years now. But with so many terms and concepts floating around, I would like to start with a bit of a foundational background first. A lot of discussion has happened around the fact that the centralized nature of our systems is being challenged by distributed and decentralized technologies, such as those deployed by Bitcoin. But is there something in this new technology stack that could be relevant for our industry? Let's go through this. First of all, we have distributed systems. In a very simple way, a distributed system is any given system that consists of several individual components, such as computers, that communicate with each other peer-to-peer directly and not through a central server. So that's the first term that's important to understand. But what is a distributed ledger then? A distributed ledger is a form of accounting that embeds reconciliation and provides both the public history of all transactions ever occurred on the network, as well as proof of value or record of ownership of a digital currency or asset. It is an append-only database, and data can always be added, therefore, to the ledger, but cannot be removed once included. And that's very different to our existing systems today. Unlike banking, accounts are decentralized down to the user, and a distributed ledger therefore eliminates the need of a central authority to keep check against manipulation of data and entries. All the information on it is securely and accurately stored using cryptography and can be accessed using keys and cryptographic signatures. The beauty of distributed ledgers is also that they're much harder to attack than centralized ledgers, because every distributed copy would need to be attacked at the same time in order to be successful. This is one area where financial market infrastructures and value transfer systems see a potential benefit over existing centralized systems. Another point of appeal, potentially, is the fact that data and the history of an asset is tied to the asset, which would remove the current need for many entities to store the static data themselves, subject to regulatory and compliance requirements. And we all know from all the regulations we've been going through the last 10 years that those demands of storage and providing proof to regulators is only going to continue to increase. On the other hand, of course, traceability and all the information around an asset is not always welcomed. For example, if we look to the banking secrecy side or front-running an order book. Then we have the distinction of public versus private. In the case of Bitcoin, we have a public ledger where the public at large, you and me and people with very big computers, can actually read and transact in the system, and there's no one that prevents us from doing so. Private ledgers, on the other hand, would only invite a selected group of participants to either read and/or transact, therefore a closed user group. Furthermore, we have the difference between permissioned networks, where the public can run a node, and here a node is a participant that downloads the whole database and is part of the network validation process, versus permissionless, where nodes are determined according to internal governance rules, so where specific entities are allowed to do the processing and validation of the network transactions. And then we have smart contracts. So what's that? Is it smart and is it a contract? Was a question asked for many years. Well, with the birth of Ethereum, which is a global supercomputer, it's not a cryptocurrency. Ether is a cryptocurrency, so it's quite important to distinguish that. Ethereum created a platform based on which participants could easily launch digital tokens with smart contracts. Now, many of you might have heard of ICOs, initial coin offerings, which turned out to be, for the most part of it, scams in the early years. But these are smart contracts based, there was a process based to raise capital for new ventures. So the idea was good, the execution in the early days was not necessarily very clean. But smart contracts, simply put, are a tool that codifies the expression of your business in governance terms. And therefore you can automate processes and workflows, which is something that our industry is badly needing, whether it's in relation to reconciliation of trades, payments, or even in the trade finance value chain, if we look at the general sort of financial world. Now, with this digital toolbox in our pocket, let's try some experiments to see what the future could look like. For example, what if we move to a T0 settlement timeframe? When it comes to settlement systems based on distributed ledgers, these can deliver functional settlement that is far superior to a T+1 or T+2 settlement cycle. Criticisms raised in relation to speed and scalability of distributed ledgers no longer hold anymore. New consensus algorithms are being developed that allow for processing at scale and speed comparable to the fastest card and payment processing systems we have today, with the additional benefit of immutability and attack resilience. And that's quite important in the age of cyber risks. Equally, concerns with privacy in an open network, such as the Bitcoin blockchain, are no longer relevant as the regulated industry began working with permissioned closed network models, where access is strictly governed and the level of data exchange across participants can be fine-tuned to ensure that not everyone sees everything. And here we use, for example, zero-knowledge proof technology to protect sensitive information between participants. So the question is no longer whether distributed ledger technology is potentially good enough for the industry, and instead we have to ask whether the market is ready for this. Moving from T+2 in Europe to a T+0 settlement would obviously result in liquidity management issues, both in the security space as well as the payment space for that matter. Potentially greater volatility because parties involved may not have the cash or securities at their disposal prior to the trade being executed. So in order to be able to embrace a DLT-based settlement system at that speed, intraday liquidity management will have to be significantly improved. Something that is still a lingering overhang from the financial crisis, which, as you may all remember, was a situation where people were looking for the liquidity that was in certain Excel databases, which certain trainees had sort of not updated overnight, and so the market had a real problem, and that problem is still incredibly acute today. As long as organizations are still struggling with their legacy technology stack, liquidity management will continue to be a challenge, and any faster settlement will remain a problem. Again, several technology solutions are coming to the fore to help the market in this space. For example, we start to see cross-institutional single asset class netting, and there's a lot more innovation going on based also on network technologies in the market, but you have to truly look around to see what is possible. Another area that would need to improve if we were to move to a T0 settlement cycle is the space of reconciliation and matching. Standardizing, automating, and speeding up the process is top of mind for many industry players and happens to have another tool in our digital toolbox that can help here: smart contracts. The question has often been asked whether these smart contracts are legally enforceable and thus could work well in our regulated industry. The answer is that more will need to be done at a regulatory level to enable smart contracts to exist within a legal framework. For example, we need to digitize our legal frameworks in order for the digital economy to be truly unlocked. Parallels to this question exist in other financial network industries such as payments and trade finance again. A recent example of how things are progressing, and you may hear a little bit more about this in the next panel, is the emerging standardization and digitization of ISDA contracts using specific programming language for smart contracts. In this way, we are creating a digital contractual framework that can allow us to apply smart contracts with certainty. It is early days for this initiative, but there is momentum. Now, what if we were to move into the digital world altogether instead of retrofitting old processes into new technology? A landscape of new concepts and products is emerging with security tokens, equity tokens, utility tokens, stablecoins, and so on. Any asset class can actually be tokenized, and the concept of decentralized finance is starting to gain ground. So what role should the industry play in this space, and why? Let's briefly look at a security token. In the digital world, a security token can be issued within months on an exchange and traded globally in a seamless way, opening up access to investment opportunities the world hasn't seen before. By trading a security token on a distributed ledger, the whole process of pre-trade, trading, and post-trade can be compressed. The immutable nature of distributed ledger technology removes the need for additional manual checks and reconciliations and improves processing time. Arguably, for this to truly take off, a regulatory framework will have to apply to this emerging market so that we ensure a level playing field across all relevant participants and stakeholders. Custody in this space also looks different. Rather than storing dematerialized securities in custodians' databases, custody solutions for digital assets would instead store owners' private crypto keys. Nevertheless, the liability regime in place today would still be the same. We've seen many custody solutions emerge initially for digital or cryptocurrencies, where classical custodians were largely not involved, but more recently for tokenized assets of any kind, provided by classical custodians, a new age of solutions is starting to emerge. To close the discussion on distributed ledgers and smart contracts, I would like to reiterate that these technology advances will need to go hand in hand with regulatory requirements and global regulatory convergence. The digital financial ecosystem operates without borders and is looking for greater efficiencies and the safety of networks with critical mass. However, regulation is primarily tied to nation states, and despite efforts to create global regulatory coherence, in particular following the financial crisis, we are still a long way off achieving it. The state of affairs appears to slowly change, in particular in light of recent announcements of the Libra project led by Facebook. If billions of users would suddenly move from regulated fiat currencies into an unregulated stablecoin, regulators and central banks will need to have a response ready before the switch is turned on. And it seems that this has actually galvanized within them and the penny has dropped. My hope, therefore, is that the collateral benefit of a lot of this technology innovation will be actually regulatory harmonization, something that I've been fighting for in the last 16 years, and I guess it'll be definitely another 16 years or more to come. Now let's turn to the second area that in my view can support capital markets, which is data simulation. With the exponential increase of data in our economies, we will need to harness this data in order to improve services to our customers and automate processes. As more and more machines are replacing humans, a development we've been witnessing, for example, on the trading side, machine-to-machine communication and data consumption is becoming the norm. In the context of data simulation, the way the market has traditionally been using backtesting and optimization based on historical data. But this data is not very helpful in representing future market dynamics, especially in times of high uncertainty and black swan events. Historical data also tends to be more incomplete or needs to be cleansed and structured in order to be consumed, and things get more complex as you have structural regulatory changes being implemented. A new way of working with data is a so-called agent-based simulation. In order to find out, for example, whether an execution algorithm is going to be successful in attracting order flow, or whether it is compliant with regulatory requirements under MiFID II, or in assessing how the market would behave if currently uncleared instruments would be brought into clearing, or to allow functionality testing for new clients before live deployment on an exchange, or run through a system update, you can use agent-based simulation to get your answer. An agent-based simulator calibrates and optimizes against historical data, but creates a synthetic data set that is being produced and it's indistinguishable from the real world. With this set of synthetic market data, which is also quite useful in the era of general data privacy regulation, because there's no individuals involved, underlying parameters can be tweaked in order to produce new data. Running simulations again and again with varying scenarios can produce tail events, market crashes, and mini flash crashes, for example. With this new agent-based simulation framework, you can expose different trading strategies of market participants, such as high-frequency traders, investment managers, or competing execution desks. You can also show microstructures of exchanges, including execution policies, order types, speed bumps, or auction rules. The latency and locations of different exchanges or execution venues can be exposed as much as banks' own internal infrastructure, including smart order routers, circuit breakers, and trade processing. Even though this process requires significant computing power, this can be achieved through distribution across existing infrastructures, something conceptually similar to what several industry initiatives in the distributed ledger space are doing as well. So distribution is clearly becoming a key theme for our digital financial world. Most importantly, agent-based risk modeling can support the maintenance of orderly markets, as future risks can be anticipated and mitigated as they occur. To wrap up, I would like to reiterate that we are at a crossroad where technology change is challenging old systems and regulations, and where, due to its borderless and digital nature, new systems are emerging that could become a counterweight to existing capital markets. Instead of hiding behind regulatory barriers and fragmentation, we must better understand these new technologies and leverage them in order to automate and streamline our processes, invent new ways of issuing, trading, and settling securities, and better manage our risk on that journey. A lot remains to be demystified, but it requires your curiosity to embrace the changing times we're in. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening.